Welcome back to episode 14 of Chambers Chatter. I'm Laura Chambers-Babelis.
And I'm Shay Chambers-Helms. Today we're super excited to introduce Claude McLeod to the show. He's probably most well known for his very deep farming roots in Seabrook, South Carolina.
Hey Claude, we are so glad to have you today.
Glad to finally be with you all, and it's been a time getting there, but here I am, and I'm in a pretty spot. So
we're going to go back to your childhood. Tell us what it was like growing up in Seabrook.
Oh boy, at Seabrook was a family little town, sort of. We had a family farm, and everybody that lived at Seabrook worked on the farm, except we had a post office, which was at Seabrook from back in the 1800s, and we had to have a country store there that a lot of people in the area shopped at. And the people who worked on the farm back in those days, there was no supermarkets and no way to get to town. So everybody that worked on the farm did their shopping in the little country store we had and bought gas. And so that was my setting at Seabrook.
Was the post office where the post office is now?
No, the post office was on the side of the store.
Okay.
And there was a door from the store into the post office. And the postmaster a lot of times ran the store. So, and the train stopped every day to bring the mail. And going back out, it would stop to pick up the outgoing mail. And a lot of times, we were just speaking of the train real quick, in the summertime when we got to be sort of 8, 9, 10 years old, I guess. And back in those days, everybody was friendly and everything, and we didn't have anything to do in the summertime. And there was a passenger train that came from Augusta to Port Royal. And the conductor would let us get on the train.
Oh.
And we would ride to Port Royal and turn around and unload the recruits and head back to Augusta, and he'd let us off at Seabrook when he picked up the mail.
What a cool memory.
That is so, yeah, I think you're the first one to share a memory like that. That is so cool.
So that was good. That killed a couple hours during the summer.
Oh, man.
And there was the old steam engine, and of course, we had at Seabrook, we had a water tank by the track down by the trestle. There was a drawbridge, and they had to keep a man in the house to open the bridge in case a boat came through, but no boats ever came through Seabrook. But sometimes the train would stop and they'd lower this. They had a big well and they'd fill up this big tank, and they had a big tank and they'd fill up the steam engine, the water car, I guess you'd call it. And that made the steam to run. And they had coal. They had a coal car.
Oh, wow.
And the coal heated up the water, and the steam ran the engine. So that's the way. And speaking of the post office, my aunt, my Uncle Hardy's wife, Caroline, her mama and daddy were Eves, but her mama was a Pinckney. Okay, so we're just about cousins.
Right, yeah. Very close to it.
I love it.
And I think, and Aunt Caroline was the postmistress for years and years. And I think before that, Mammy, we called Mammy, who was Aunt Caroline's mother, who was a Pinckney. He married Harford Eve. And Harford Eve was from the Habersham farm, and they were. My memory's not 100%, but I'm 99% sure they ran the store for a while, and put up the mail. So that's good. And a real quick story about them, y'all might not have heard. I don't know that the Eves lived at Habersham. Pinckneys were on Spring Island. And I don't know how they met, but it must have been true love, because Granddaddy, we called Harford Eve Granddaddy and Mammy, he would get in a rowboat at Habersham. And I'm sure he would work the tides, and he would row the boat to Spring Island to see Mammy, who was Sadie Eve.
Long row.
And they finally got together, I guess, and somehow that was a long distance romance.
That is really long distance.
That is far.
And Broad River can get rough. I'm sure he had some times out there.
Especially on a rowboat, too.
Yeah, that's right. We're in motors and little outboards.
That must have been real true love.
That's right.
I love it.
But anyways, I'm sort of getting off the subject. But they lived at Seabrook later on. Uncle Hardy and Aunt Caroline, right across the street from where I lived, put in a home there. And Granddaddy had retired from the Greyhound bus station. He was a Greyhound bus station agent. And they lived there a good while, and it wasn't long before they moved to Savannah. So, but they were on Seabrook and everything. So that was part of my childhood growing up. And when I was 12 years old, my father grew up in Beaufort, and Uncle Hardy and everything on Bay Street at the, we call it the McLeod house, the big house, but whatever it is now. But my father evidently had always had his eye on the Secession House. And so it became for sale. And we were living in the house that my grandfather had built at Seabrook in 1900. But he bought the Secession House on Craven Street, and we moved to Beaufort when I was 12 years old. And I grew up my teenage years in Beaufort on Craven Street, which couldn't have been a better place. It was right in the middle of town.
Yeah.
It was downtown, and it was just a great place to grow up. Beaufort was small, and everybody knew everybody, and had just a very few policemen around and everything. And I grew up there, and that was about the time I was going to junior high school, so we could walk down to the junior high school where the old high school was, where the elementary school is now, I think, on Bay Street.
Yeah.
And I went to elementary school where USCB is, right in there, 1st through the 6th grade. So,
What were some of your favorite memories growing up downtown?
downtown, well, we just, when I got old enough to drive, I guess that's when my memory really starts. I could drive around town, you know, and I'd go down. My cousin, my father, and my Uncle Hardy's sister was Marjorie Fordham. And they lived in the old house right down the street on Bay Street, and he had Fordham Hardware, of course. And so we were all right there close, and it was a close class. Everybody was right there together. Of course, everybody came from everywhere in Beaufort County to the high school. I mean, that was the school. So we had friends and close friends, and it was just everybody's mom and daddy knew everybody else, and you didn't misbehave because somebody would get back to who you didn't want it to get back to or something like that. And well, that was it. But the Bay Street down there, we could go down, and the Breeze Theater was on Bay Street.
Oh, yeah.
Had theaters and pictures, and had the serials once a week that they'd change of the Cowboy, Gene Autry, and Roy Rogers, and Lone Ranger, and all those kind of people. And then they had the newsreels, so there wasn't any TV, and you couldn't get anything. But once a week, I think, they put out a newsreel to all the theaters, and so you could get the last week's news.
Oh.
But that doesn't mean that it was the last week's news, because it had to come from no telling where and when for them to put it on there. So that was good, and the drugstore was right down there, Luther's Pharmacy, and Green's was right down the street a little bit, and then later on Amar's was right around the corner. And but Luther's was the main. They had a soda fountain, and they had some little chairs you can sit in there and watch Dr. Luther and Dr. Ogletree with nice people and a lady. And after I got married, this was years later, and we were walking down Bay Street with my wife Brenda, and we walked in there and got a Coke. And I said, put it on my mama's tab. And Brenda couldn't believe that I was putting a Coke on a tab. But anyway, they sent the bill every month, and I guess my daddy paid it.
That's a good small town right there.
And anyway, being right on Bay Street was right across from the marina, which was built after we moved there. It was first a parking lot that my uncle Angus Fordham, who was the mayor at the time, he had a vision to put the parking lot right there behind, well, I want to say the Griffin's Sinclair station, which was built on pilings out over the marsh, which would give a lot of people.
Station. Wow.
It would give a lot of people heart attacks today.
Yeah.
And right across the street from it was the big Sea Island Hotel. Then they built the marina, and the marina was right there off of the parking lot. And we kept a boat there, and we could get in the river anytime. And during the summertime in Beaufort, we sort of lived in the river. That was what people did back in those days. And so that was one of my downtown memories. And another downtown memory was when they replaced the old wooden drawbridge, which was a bridge with wooden slats, and every time you drove across it, you thought you might fall through.
Yeah, that sounds a little scary.
And anyways, in 1959, Hurricane Gracie hit Beaufort. And I was at Clemson at the time, and I got home, a group of us, and many of us could get in the car. We headed to Beaufort, and everywhere the cops told us not to come, but we did. And we got to Beaufort about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and one of the fellows lived on Ladies Island. And I had to drive across that bridge after I knew that Gracie, and Beaufort looked like a war town. It looked like a bomb. Man, there were National Guard people everywhere, no lights, trees on top of houses and cars and all this sort of stuff. It was really a sight to see.
Did you cross that bridge that day?
I had to go across the bridge to say, Jackie, to Ladies Island. I sure did. And but it was just a things that you put up with.
Yeah.
And back in those days, I mean, people complain about the bridge opening now. I mean, there wasn't any hours. I mean, whenever a boat came through, it was a sort of a lower bridge, and that bridge was always opening.
Probably took a while to open it too.
Matter of fact, the railroad bridge at Seabrook, when I lived at Seabrook, when I went back to Seabrook, the drawbridge and the bridge keeper for the railroad lived up. Whenever they did have a boat that called for some help maybe, and I'd go down, and they had hand cranks.
Oh, geez.
My
Put it in
gosh.
the middle of the draw. And the first thing you had to do is unlock it so it would move, and then you had to put it in another slot and pushed it and opened that drawer so the boat could go. So
Oh my gosh.
might have been an oyster boat or something like that. It was just a low bridge. But anyway, that was an experience opening a drawbridge, which not many people have done, I don't guess.
No, definitely not.
But everything was downtown. They had the Wallace and Downers and the Lipsies and Bart Fordham had an appliance store downtown. Of course, you've had people tell you about downtown Beaufort, I'm sure. But anyway, Beaufort was a great town. It was just a good town to grow up in.
That's amazing. So when y'all moved into town, y'all didn't sell the farm at that point, correct?
No, we kept the farm, and my daddy went back and forth every day, and we rented the house that we lived in that my granddaddy built. And we had 4 or 5 tenants in there, I guess, till I got married in 1966. Back in those days, Beaufort County was the highest paying county in the state for school teachers. And because of that, the government gave them a lot of money because all of the military children went to the county schools. And so therefore, that meant there were a lot of pilots in town, young pilots, and that meant that a lot of young lady teachers that might have wanted to marry a pilot and teach school came to Beaufort.
That is interesting.
And my wife was one of them.
Okay.
And she was from Myrtle Beach, and she came to Beaufort, and we got together. And that's when I moved back to Seabrook, to the family house at Seabrook.
Did you take over the business at that point?
No, at that time my daddy was still living and my Uncle Hardy was still living.
Okay.
And farming was big in Beaufort County back in those days. I mean, we had a big farm and there were farmers all over Beaufort County.
Yeah, to what scale were y'all farming?
Yeah, and what were y'all farming? What scale and?
Well, we all vegetables.
Okay.
And we grew a fall crop of certain vegetable, and then through the winter, and then we had the spring crop, some of them of the fall. Because of the temperature, we had 2 seasons for what we call the tender crops. And that was cucumbers and squash, all the kinds of squash. And then you went into the winter greens and all the kinds of greens and cabbage and beets and turnips and onions and all that sort of stuff. And then you went through your winter crops, and then you planted your spring crops, which were basically the same as the fall crops. And we planted hard squash was one that we didn't plant in the fall, acorn, butternut, buttercup, and spaghetti squash. So we grew those for the spring and into the summer. And we weren't big tomato people, but we grew a lot of tomatoes, and we had a tomato machine. We packed all our own vegetables and everything.
Wow.
And it was a large farming operation, which we weren't the only one in Beaufort. I mean, you probably had 10 to 12 or more in Beaufort.
Wow.
But it seems that most of the truck farming, as I call it, with the crops I just named, were more on the Beaufort side, and the tomatoes and later watermelons were on the islands.
Yeah.
Because of the type soil. They had the sand, and of course they stayed warmer than we did for just a few days, but it made a big difference with the markets.
Never would have thought that just a few days would make a difference.
And so it was mostly the soil types.
Okay.
For growing tomatoes. Tomatoes like a more sandy soil. We have a lot of clay as you go out that way in our soil, which suited the other crops real well.
And y'all sold nationally?
Everything we sold went north. We had markets starting in Washington, D.C., all the way to Boston. We dropped from Washington, Baltimore, New York, and Boston, and a couple of other places. And then we did a lot of business out in the Midwest, and we'd ship stuff leaving Seabrook, and we'd go to Cincinnati, Columbus, Ohio, and up in that area, and sometimes St. Louis, and going to Chicago. And then we shipped a lot of stuff into Canada back in those days.
Jeez, okay.
Wow.
And went to Montreal and Toronto, mainly.
And did y'all handle the shipping part of the business as well?
We handled everything. We shipped everything basically by rail.
Okay.
It was probably in the late 50s, something in the 50s. And the rails were getting so irregular they couldn't count on getting to markets on time, so it switched over to mostly to trucks. And my father and my uncle decided if we were paying trucking companies to haul our produce, we might as well have our own trucks. So we bought a fleet of 5 or 6 produce trucks to haul our stuff to these markets, and which was a good thing. But evidently back in those days they had a hard time getting truck drivers that could stay on the road, and they had a lot of bad wrecks. But luckily nobody ever got hurt in our wrecks.
Oh, good.
We want to take a quick break to thank our sponsor, Watkins Mechanical.
Hey y'all, it's Josh with Watkins Mechanical. Warm weather is finally here and your system is working hard to keep you cool. Here are 3 quick tips to help. 1. Replace your air filters monthly. Restrictions cause your system to work harder and reduce your air quality. 2. Keep your outdoor unit clean. Remove any leaves, debris, or dirt for proper airflow. 3. Set your thermostat at a constant temperature. Programmable thermostats improve efficiency and help save you money. For quality service and lasting results, call Watkins Mechanical, trusted in the Lowcountry for over 25 years. Brian, whatever it takes.
But anyway, they got out of the trucking business pretty quick.
Yeah, dangerous.
So we had Carolina Produce Haulers, which was a produce hauling outfit, but it didn't last very long. And we went back to putting stuff on other trucks and paying people to haul the vegetables for us. And of course, a lot of the brokers for different big chain stores in some of the bigger cities, they bought stuff that picked up from us for their stores, and they'd send their own trucks to pick them up. They'd start in Florida and go on up, and they'd pick up their produce on the way. And it was probably a 2-day trip to get from field to market back in those days.
Yeah.
Whereas you put it on a train, it was probably 3 or 4 days to a week. But a lot of the stuff, cabbage and all your greens and your radishes and turnips and all that sort of stuff, took a lot of ice. And so the trains would have to ice. They had icing stations for the trains, believe it or not, because that was a lot of things. And for our part, we had our own big ice house at Seabrook after we built it in the 50s. And up to that, we bought ice at the ice house at Burton. And if the truck could go down there, they had a big crusher. You could blow it on top. But mostly we got our ice in 300-pound blocks.
So wild.
And we'd send a truck down there 2 or 3 times a day and pick up ice. And we had our own ice crusher. And you'd split the 300-pound blocks in half, and you'd put the ice in there, and this blower would crush it up, and had a hose that you would shoot. They'd shoot back all the way up the trucks, just about.
Jeez.
Yeah, but you did it along and along, so everything would get a good coat of ice.
A lot of logistics that went into it.
Yeah, it was a big operation. We probably had 250, 300 people working in our operation.
Y'all are probably one of the biggest employers of Beaufort County at that point.
We were probably so.
Wow.
Back in those days, and we weren't the only ones. I mean,
Yeah.
But the industry, Beaufort County was agriculture and shrimping, crabbing. That was the economy of Beaufort County. The air station was the naval air station. Of course, it closed down after World War II, and until they reactivated it in the 50s, and that's when all the Marines started coming in and building the economy back up with the Marines. And wasn't long before, I don't know how the retirees, all the people maybe coming to see some Marines, but they discovered Beaufort. And people started to come visit, and they'd visit, and then they'd want to come back, and then they wanted to stay. And you walk down the street now, you don't know anybody. Back in those days, you walked down Bay Street, you knew everybody you passed.
Yeah.
It was just that kind of town. Yeah. But now as all y'all know, man, I don't know who's going to live in all the apartments they build in around there.
Oh, it's crazy how many apartments.
It's something. So we were getting the size farm, and we had a pretty good size operation.
Yeah.
And
when did you take it over?
Well, I came back. I came in 1962. And my father and my uncle were running the place, and I just came in and I took over. My first job was taking over one of the field crews. And not only did we have that many people working, but we ran a fleet of school buses, old school buses that we bought from the state. Not just us, all the farmers. And we had, all of us had mechanics to keep them running and all this sort of stuff. And we brought labor from, the furthest place was Allen. A bus came from Allendale every day from Walterboro, one up around Jacksonboro.
Wow.
And then we had a local Sheldon bus, and then we had our local bus, which was mostly for people who worked in the packing shed. The field crews came in and they harvested the crops and took it to the packing shed, and the packing shed crew would stay till whenever we finished to load a truck. Sometimes it was 1 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my goodness.
And then they'd go home and they'd be back there at 7:30 in the morning. That was,
jeez, long days.
That's right. And it was just, that's just the way it was back in those days. Everybody was working and glad to have a job and didn't miss.
Yeah.
Of course, I lived in Seabrook, and I've worked with my father and my uncle, and I sort of moved in. My daddy was more or less the office part of the fellow after World War II. He was in World War II, and he was in London most of the time, in Paris. So and Uncle Hardy stayed home to run the farm, which was part of the government setup. I mean, government, they didn't take people who were running farms to provide food for people.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a
Right.
critical job.
And so when my daddy came back, he took over the office part more of it and the business part, and my Uncle Hardy was the outdoor man, I guess you would say. And he was in charge of the planting, and then when it came to harvesting and the packing shed and talking with the market, we talked with all these markets I told you about every morning, about 5 or 6 o'clock, because that's when they were selling produce and deciding what they wanted for the next day, or 2 days later or whenever. And so I sort of worked in more under my Uncle Hardy's wing at that time, and from taking a crew out and being with the crew every day, I moved in more to the packing shed with packing, and we had a good, real good crew packing shed, and we had good foremen in all these places that were running each individual segment of the business. And so then I gradually took place from my Uncle Hardy's place, and I moved into talking to the markets and taking their orders, so to speak, and trying to give them what they wanted to sell 2 days later. We'd put it on a truck. And so I lived that. Anyway, my father died in 1978, so he was there quite a while. And about that time, he and my uncle were both about ready to retire. And for my daddy's place, we never hired a secretary before, but we had a real nice gal that we hired to take over the office and do all the paperwork and all that sort of stuff. Barbara Brady, she was from Yemassee. And we moved into, she was in the bookkeeping part of it, and I was pretty much running the packing shed and talking to the markets and lining up the trucks to come in to take what we had to ship out. And so that's basically where I stayed. My Uncle Hardy was looking over my shoulder all the time, though. And he was right there. He didn't retire and go somewhere, you know.
That is so funny.
He was keeping everything going. But more and more, he moved into Beaufort. And back in those days, there were good years and bad years with farming.
Sure.
But you always had a good year that would make up for a couple of bad years.
Yeah.
In 1977, we had a severe drought. And of course, farmers lived off of their land by borrowing money on their land and their property and everything. And then the government had a big program. All the farmers were about broke, and they lost all their crops and everything.
Oh, gosh.
And the Small Business Administration, they were in Walterboro, set up an office, and they couldn't loan you enough money. Oh, they just gave you all the money you wanted.
Oh, jeez.
Wow.
And then it just sat up for a while, and then they wanted to get that money back.
Yeah. Set you up for failure almost.
And so a lot of farmers didn't make it. The government took over their properties.
Oh.
Yeah.
Which was sad, really sad. Been in the farming for generations. Yeah. But anyway, we held on, and we looked, and we kept on farming. And but the cost of everything kept going up, and the price of everything we were selling stayed the same. And so we kept waiting on that one good year. This was in the early 80s, and it never did come. So in 1984, my great-granddaddy planted the first crop at Seabrook in 1884.
Oh,
Wow.
And in 1984, Uncle Hardy and I, we decided that was it.
shutting the doors.
100 years.
So we just couldn't go. We planted vegetables for 100 years.
That is wild.
I did
that.
too.
That's so sad.
Yeah, but well, that was all farmers.
Yeah.
That was just what happened. And so today, most of the big farms are corporate farms, and
Which is
taken
awful.
over. Not many family farms left the way they were back in those days.
There really aren't.
But I tell people we quit farming in 1984, and we should have quit in 1974 when everybody else quit.
But that you had to make that 100-year mark.
That's right. So we made it 100 years, and then we rented the land for a couple of years. And after that, the big thing there was you had a lot of property to plant pine trees. So we planted just about all of our open field property in pine trees.
Wow.
And so with pine trees, that's a 20-year crop. So you just had to let them grow, and but you didn't worry about the rain and it was coming and having to sell a crop every year and all this sort of stuff. So, but we were very fortunate at Seabrook that we had property that had value to it that a lot of farms didn't have.
Right.
And so we sort of put ourselves in the real estate business. And we were selling lots. And one real was that my father and my uncle in the 50s bought Bay Point Island. And so the family owned the Bay Point Island.
Okay.
Bay Point Island got us out of debt. We had to sell it. It was their plan that the family would own Bay Point Island forever.
Wow. What were the plans with Bay Point?
We would just leave it the way it was and enjoy it.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's a special island.
It
We
is.
it pretty much is now in Ted Turner's. It's in the conservation easement. But that's what my father and my uncle wanted to do without anything being formal. It was just going to be there. But anyway, came time and we had to sell it. Sometimes you just got to sell stuff. And then we had a lot of property, and then the local people started out at Seabrook in particular, and people started moving out of town wanting to buy acre lots. So we started selling acre lots, and a lot of them we financed. Matter of fact, most of them we financed, owner financing. And it got a lot of people in a house or a mobile home that normally wouldn't have one.
Yeah.
And then came along the county. In the 1990s, they passed this thing called a comprehensive plan. Already, and that put a lot of development out of business.
Yes, it
including
did.
us. And people couldn't understand why they couldn't buy an acre lot. You wouldn't believe what you had to go through to sell a 1 acre lot.
Yeah.
We started selling the larger tracts of land, which we had. We had a couple of islands over on the Whale Branch that we sold with deep water access. We had a farm at Sheldon that we finally sold all of it, and sold Stewart Point. We had a lot of property at Stewart Point. But we were maintaining the rest of the property and just maintaining the upkeep of the property that had been in the family since the 1800s. 1884 is when my great-granddaddy bought the property. And but all this whole time that we were doing this, our family was growing.
Yeah. I'm sure.
And one generation led to the next, and then that generation led to another generation. And, a lot of people have got different ideas about how to do things and everything.
Yeah. A lot of opinions.
So we did, and the F station was encroaching, and we had a lot of interest in our whole property, which was probably 800 to 1,000 acres. But the air station was there, and they had something called the ACU zone. And that was a noise and an accident potential zone. And so you couldn't do anything if you were close to the air station. I'm getting off track. But anyway, I know they got tired of me at the county council meetings because I didn't miss a beat down there just about every 2 weeks to tell them that they needed to do something. They needed to buy our property if they were going to tell us what to do with it. And so they came and made us an offer between the air station and the county and a small part from the state to buy our development rights off of half of the property at Seabrook, 400 acres. So they offered a pretty good deal, so we put 400 acres on a conservation easement at Seabrook. And then we gave 100 acres back to the county for a passive park that was in this ACU zone, and they still hadn't done anything with it. So that left us with about 300 acres, and we sold a little bit along. And we got this top-notch developer, and we had the property laid out, and golf courses and everything else,
wow.
but the county wouldn't even talk about it. So, and so we're dealing with the 300 acres now, and we're still dealing with the ACU zone and the county comprehensive plan. They decided that we were farmers and we should make a living off of farming our land. But they didn't understand that you couldn't make a living farming anymore.
Yeah, no.
For the last 20 years, we've been trying to sell our property at Seabrook, which right now there's a good interest in it. So maybe another year, somebody else will own that property.
A little bittersweet, though,
Yeah,
sure.
that's bittersweet, but I get back to the size of the family.
Yeah, yeah.
With people living here, there, and yonder, and doing different things and everything. And I'm the only one. I'm on Seabrook with my two boys and Irby West, my cousin Hope's son. You might know Irby.
I know Drew. I'm good friends with Drew.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So their daddy Irby wanted to try farming a few years ago, which he grew some beautiful crops. He had a home delivery type thing, which was the thing at that time. And he set up and he delivered boxes once a week.
I remember that.
I think I do too.
Once a week, and he'd go as far as Columbia and over in Somerville and maybe, I think he might have gone into Charleston, and mostly right around Beaufort and everything. Yeah. And everybody would they would pay him up front to get a box of nice vegetables once a week. And they got them, but he ran into the same thing that we ran into with the bigger operation.
Not every year's a good, or every week's a good week.
Not every week's a good week for crop.
Well, it's not that, but the cost of doing it and what you could charge for people.
What a great idea, though.
Yeah, but Irby inherited from his granddaddy how to grow crops really good. And as a boy, he grew some pretty stuff at Seabrook. It was a much smaller scale than what we did many years ago.
I love that.
But so anyway, that was that, and we still had pine trees growing on the side and everything. But that's when we decided it was to sale the whole time to really try to put the pressure on somebody to buy it. And we had 3 or 4 different contracts, but because of the county rules and regulations, it didn't go. Yeah. So anyway, hopefully this time might be the good time.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
If not, we got a pretty piece of property.
I'm going to switch gears and ask you a question going back to living in the Secession House. So there's so many people who would just love to know what those walls could tell. Do you have any specific ghost stories or anything that house would talk about?
When we moved into Secession House, the first thing my mama wanted to do was paint. And and the person before, I remember distinctly, had wallpaper. I guess that was the thing back in those days, I don't know. And she didn't want the wallpaper, so the wallpaper had to come down. And down in the basement, they had painted over whatever was in the basement. But it was one spot, I think there was about a 2-foot square spot in the basement that was a clear piece of glass where the Yankee soldiers had signed their names on the wall.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
But then the paint was flaking, so they started flaking. And the more paint they flaked, the more signatures they found.
That's pretty cool.
And,
That is really
so
cool.
finally, the entrance on Craven Street, that whole area back in that part of the house was signed by Yankee soldiers, and it was the paymasters department they used that house for, evidently. And it had a lot of numbers and stuff in it. And so first thing my daddy did was covered the whole thing with a varnish or shellac or something like that. And it's still that way today.
Oh, wow.
So if you get in that house and go in the basement, you'll see all of the signatures, which is one of the things. And my mama, she came from a big family up in Latta above Florence. And she had a couple of brothers that were always doing stuff and everything. But lo and behold, they got their names on that wall too.
That is so funny. That's really funny. Okay, last question. Where was the first place you took your then girlfriend, future wife, on a date? In Beaufort.
Oh boy, I wish she'd have come with me.
Or what was one of your more favorite spots to take her?
I tell you what, back in those days, there was a shack drive-in.
Okay.
And that was the spot to go to get a hamburger or a hot dog or french fries or something to drink or whatever. And everybody hung out at the shack. And there was another place across Broad River called Bailey's.
Oh, I've heard some stories about Bailey's. Mm-hmm.
And Bailey's was another hangout on weekends. Always had a band and a lot of refreshments. And so the crowd pretty much congregated at Bailey's. And not only from Beaufort, they came from Bluffton and Ridgeland and even up around Hampton, I think. That was the spot. And everybody knew everybody from. They did have a little ruckus every now and then. But
Got to.
might have been over a pretty girl, I don't know. But anyway, my wife Brenda was from Myrtle Beach. And she came to Beaufort, as I tell her, she came to find her a pilot. But she found her a dumb poor farmer. But anyway, she had friends that lived right across the street from Secession House in an apartment next door. And every time when I was on the farm and she was over there, and I'd come and park at the side gate to go in the house. I lived at the house till I got married, so I mean that was all. I always talked to her and all this stuff. And I wore a cowboy hat back in those days too, and get the sun off my head. And so and then I started seeing her at the shack drive-in. That's where all the local boys would get, and you'd be surprised how many of those teachers are still in Beaufort. They didn't marry pilots. They like the local boys better.
Well, that says something for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, so I'm one of those lucky boys.
Oh.
And but where we went on our first date would be a good question. It might have been the Bailey's. I don't know. There weren't many places to go back in those days.
You'll have to ask her and then report back to us.
That's right.
Well, Claude, thank you so much for your time today. This was a real treat.
Oh, well, I hope I didn't rattle on too much.
This was so fun. You did great. Fun. Thank you.
It's been great, and I appreciate y'all doing this. I look forward to seeing it.